There are companies that are forward-thinking, that recognise, let's get on with this, we should be doing this, let's do it. And there are companies that do that. And then there are companies that seem to think that, no, it's going to be fine. And they're the companies that we will launch public-facing campaigns, and we will highlight to their customers, to their consumers, exactly what they're complicit in. They will show them images of hens in cages or broiler chickens on factory farms or live shackle slaughter. And as we know, when people actually see it, they're pretty horrified. And those campaigns may last a day. We've had day-long campaigns, we've had week-long campaigns, we've had year-long campaigns. But we will not stop and we will not rest until those companies make the commitment.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Humane Hangouts podcast. Now, today I have the real privilege of being joined by Vicky Bond. Vicky is a trained veterinarian who now works as the managing director of the non-profit organisation, the Humane League. Now, if you watch my channel a lot, you may have noticed that I often talk about effective giving. And one of the organisations I've mentioned is Animal Charity Evaluators. Well, the Humane League has been chosen as one of the most effective animal groups worldwide by Animal Charity Evaluators. So with that in mind, Vicky, I'm sure you're incredibly busy. So thank you for finding the time to go onto the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. So for listeners who aren't already aware of who you are and what you do, would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
So I originally, as you mentioned, trained as a vet, and while I was training and then after I graduated, felt I probably wasn't going to make the impact that I felt was needed for animals. And the reason that I became a vet was because I wanted to help animals. And so I decided to look and see what I could do. And one of those things was advocacy, and using my scientific background to kind of push for welfare improvements for farm animals. And having seen factory farming in real life, I was absolutely horrified as a student about the way we treated animals, and I was vegetarian at that time anyway. And I very much felt like this. I have to change this. This has to change. And so, I ended up working at a number of different places, but full time at Compassion in Wild Farming in the research department to start with, and then working with food businesses. And then I moved on from working at Compassion to where we are now, the Humane League, The Humane League was founded in the US over 15 years ago. And then 5 and a bit years now, goodness, we started up in the UK, just the two of us. And now we've got to a team of 26 people here in the UK. And so the Humane League advocates for improved welfare reforms, but also about keeping animals off your plate and choosing a plant-based vegan diet as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be good to go into the strategy of the Humane League a little bit later. That experience you had of becoming a vet because you want to help animals and then becoming aware of factory farming and what's happening to animals and being shocked by it. I guess that's kind of similar to what's happening with like vegans generally, is that like we find out what's happening to animals, we think it's terrible, and then we change our behavior. And I kind of wonder how your experience compares to like the average vet, or like what the kind of atmosphere among vet students who care about animals is. Because like are there points where people are just like, guys, this is an atrocity, like this sucks, or is it like not talked about that often?
It's a really good question. So I'm vegan now, but I was vegetarian back then, and there was only a few vegetarians in my year of 100 people, odd people. Veterinary is an interesting one. A lot of people obviously will say they love animals, but they still consume animals. And that's not really any different in veterinary school either. There's a number of different times that I remember distinctly. We went to a slaughterhouse for chickens. Very vivid memory of this. You walk into the slaughterhouse, it's blue lighting because that kind of calms the birds, but gives it even more of a house of horrors feel when you're a person. And you go in and you see these chickens and they're going overhead. The carcasses of the birds are going overhead. And in waterbath stunning, they're slaughtering like 180, 210 birds a minute. So, it's just like this real quick conveyor over your head. And you walk in, I remember walking down these steps and then just seeing all these birds hanging by their legs from these shackles. And then as we walked along, there was like a pit, and all the live birds were coming out of their crates and people were handling them, and putting them onto the shackle line, but the shackle line's going so fast, there's like 4 or 5 people there, so they're having to like do it very forcefully, and because you get larger birds or smaller birds, their legs are getting forced in if they're too large, and then they're flapping because they're panicking because the birds shouldn't be upside down. They don't have a diaphragm, so being upside down panics these birds a lot. So they're flapping, there's feathers, and then they're going on a conveyor, and then they're going into this water bath stunner. And the water bath stunner is meant to make them unconscious so that when they have their throats cut, they don't feel it. But often in water bath stunning, because of the speed of the birds, because some birds manage to lift their heads so they don't actually go in the water bath stunner, so they miss the stunner completely. Some birds' wing will go in first, so they get a pre-electric stun, so they get a stun from their wing all the way to their legs, and then up their legs, and then their head goes in, so they get electrocuted once and then twice. Often the electric shock doesn't work effectively, full stop, so they either come round from consciousness quickly, or it doesn't even make them unconscious to start with. And then you see the bird's throats being cut, and then look down, and it sort of turns a corner for the birds to go up into the to the scalding tank, and there was a man standing there just coated in blood. And he was cutting the throats of the birds that had missed the throat cutter. And he was doing it like 1 every 10 birds or something, which kind of gives you an indication of how poorly they were being, like either stunned or the throat being cut properly. And we know that like 2 or 3% of those birds will still be conscious when they go into the scalding tank, which is obviously horrific. And I and I remember our lecturer just looked at me. I don't have a good poker face. And the lecturer just looked at me, she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was just, I couldn't imagine that we could do something like that to animals. And we do. And I was kind of looking around like, I don't consume chicken. So in some ways I felt like, this isn't me doing this, which is something. But afterwards, a lot of my friends were also horrified, because it is hard pressed for you not to be horrified by that. That said, there are vet students that have worked in slaughterhouses, and obviously vets often go on, not often, but some vets go on to be officers that are looking after the animals' welfare in the slaughterhouse. And I know those, people said, I can't eat chicken now, like that, I'm done, like there's no way I'm consuming that if that's how they're killed. But that lasted not very long, unfortunately. I think it's actually changing in the veterinary world as well. Certainly when I, started doing some lectures till even a few years in, there were more people coming up saying like, "Oh, I want to be working on this really bothers me." And I don't think there was the same exposure of that. When did I graduate? A long time ago. A while ago anyway, or when I was at vet school. So I think things are changing, but
sorry to interrupt. I guess it seems like the feeling you had of being like appalled by what was happening and what you saw isn't that uncommon. Like other vets around you experienced that, but perhaps what like separated you from the others is that like your behavior change was sustained, whereas theirs wasn't. But I guess there are questions over like how sustained going vegetarian or vegan is in the general population anyway. And I guess the fact that these vets who like care about animals are seeing this and that it's not leading to sustained behavior change in terms of their diets kind of maybe places another piece of evidence onto working towards institutional change compared to like trying to get individuals to go vegan. And like it seems like the Humane League strategy is very much like getting system change as opposed to getting individuals to go vegan. Well, I know you guys do the individual work as well, but it seems like the focus is institutional. Although maybe rather than just telling you, I should just ask you, like, what is the strategy of the Humane League?
No, you've nailed it. Yeah, absolutely. So institutional change, it is the quickest form of making blanket changes. We do individual. We do advocate that people do keep cruelty off their plate. And if you want to keep cruelty off your plate, you can't really eat animals and you can't eat dairy products or eggs because there's no way of knowing how that animal was produced. And even in higher welfare systems, we're talking about thousands of animals on a farm, not 3 in your backyard that you can pet over and, oh, this one's not eaten today, so I'm going to take them to the vets. Even in organic systems, as much as they strive to improve welfare, there are thousands of animals, or hundreds, or even tens in the case of cows or whatever. And there is an economic price on that. And so it is the reality that if we can make these institutional changes, then there's this uplift across the country, across the globe, in the case of what we're doing with Cage Free. And so there is that need for individuals to have responsibility and to understand that they do have purchasing power. There's no getting away from that. We all have purchasing power. We're seeing, it's Veganuary. It's a great month for people to try vegan, and we see all these products come out because of that, and because they're putting them out because people will buy them. So it isn't the case that you don't have any power by being vegan. You do, but unfortunately, we're always at this sort of static level where we're just not getting enough change quickly enough. And this is how we make the change quickly. And so institutional change, when we're looking at it, is to start with on a company level. So we go to big companies, and be them restaurant brands, be the retailers, manufacturers, and we get them to commit to higher welfare standards. And so we started with Cage Free, and that's been very successful. And now we're working on chickens reared for meat, or broiler chickens as the industry calls them, and we're asking for higher welfare standards there. And then part of that model is get the companies to do it, because companies are the quickest and easiest route for us to do this. But what we really want is legislation, right? That's what we want. We don't want anyone to fall through the cracks. We can't get to every business in the UK. We have to prioritise, the ones that take up the vast majority of the market, but there'll always be a small number of companies that are too small for us to really make impact with or use our time effectively for. And so that's where we go to legislation. So we've just launched our Beatrice campaign, and that campaign is very much to push for ending cages in the UK. So we rescued Beatrice from an enriched cage farm earlier last year. She lives with our animal welfare specialist in Wiltshire. And, we've watched her journey, and we've recorded her journey to show what she looked like, featherless and very sad for herself when she arrived. This beautiful chicken that we see in pictures that loves, lying in the sun and dust bathing and having the freedom that she can have. And we're telling her story and giving that story to MPs to get them to connect and understand, this is one chicken of the millions of chickens that we have in these cages, and then they have the power to free them. So institutional change on a company level, and then bringing, once companies have all committed, why would legislators go, oh, well, this is going to affect the economy's doing it already. You just need to make sure that absolutely everyone is doing it. And so that's why we push for legislation. So pushing for cage-free legislation. And then we're also, with fish, it's a little bit different. Firstly, we say fishes because we want to sort of recognise that they're all individuals. So don't think that I've got my grammar terribly wrong when I say fishes.
I worry about that as well. I started saying fishes, I know it's correct, but I know other people don't think it's correct.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good for the ego to just say fishes.
Yeah.
To accept that you might sound like an idiot.
So we're working on fishes, and in the UK, we predominantly farm salmon, trout and tilapia. And predominantly those are salmon and trout, and they're in kind of Wales and Scotland mostly. And the problem we have with fishes is we have a big body of evidence now that fish are sentient. I don't know why we needed it, but apparently we did. We've got this body of evidence now that fishes are sentient. That message of it not being possible seems to have pretty much died, thankfully. What we don't know is, and what there hasn't been enough research in, is really what can we do to improve welfare that really truly makes welfare impact for these animals. And that's been challenging. But one of the things that we do know is at the very least, when we're handling and slaughtering these fishes, that they don't die a horrific death on, in CO2 or on ice or poorly stunned and things. So we're pushing for humane slaughter, or more humane slaughter, and we're pushing for fishes to be stunned before slaughter. And that will be a step in the right direction of getting recognition. These fishes are worthy of the same legislation as other farmed animals. We have slaughter regulations for every other farmed animal, but fishes. And that's not true, actually, sorry, obviously for decapods and cephalopods as well. But we see this as a possibility that is very easy to achieve. We actually have, and this is the main point, the science to back up what we're saying, in that there is machinery that you can use that will ensure the fish are stunned, these species of fish. There are over 400 or something species, so it's more challenging when you go into other countries, but we have it here that we could use. And so that's why we're lobbying the government to do this. And they have actually opened a consultation right now that we've been part of, as have another number of other groups like Compassion and Animal Equality, to push forward for this improvement in slaughter regulations for fishes.
Mm-hmm. I feel like when we're going into a conversation about welfare reform, there's kind of like a prerequisite conversation that needs to be had, because like many vegans in the community kind of see welfare reform as like the enemy of getting to where we want to be. I guess there's like people fall on different sides of the argument where some people will say that, you know, if welfare reform is introduced, it helps create a shift in culture that towards people caring about the well-being of animals and helps create momentum for further change and will help us get to abolition. And then on the other side, you've got people like Gary Francione who will say things like, you know, welfare reform makes people feel better about consuming animal products, reinforces the notion that animals are objects to be used, reinforces speciesism. I'm wondering, like, I mean, it's kind of obvious from what you're saying, but I'm wondering how you think about this debate.
Yeah, I'm glad it's obvious about where my views stand on this. But
I'd be very surprised to feel like, I think welfare reform is terrible for animals.
Look, you know, you can be an idealist in anything. You can. There is plenty of things that I would change in this world, not just for farmed animals, that simply is not possible like that. And unfortunately, that's where we're at. And if we look at other movements, if we take gay rights, for instance, where we're still not at a place where there is equality per se, but there is certainly a much greater advancement compared to 10, 20, 30 years ago when it was actually illegal and that you might be put in jail. It just isn't the case to say that these reforms don't work, because people do need to be to some degree taken on a journey. And if people care about animals, why do we have vegans now? Okay, we've always had throughout history. There have been philosophers and things that have thought deeply about these things and have stopped consuming meat, obviously. But predominantly that has not, you know, the vast majority of the population has not been the case. It is the case that we have animals in our home now, that we recognise animals, that we see all these incredible things that animals do. And so then when people are exposed to these pictures, they're like, well, that is absolutely not acceptable. You cannot possibly think that this is okay for animals to be like this. And we don't. And, you know, ideally we'd say, well, then don't consume anything, because then you can ensure this. But we're at a place where we have birds, hundreds of millions around the world of birds in cages. And if we sit here just waiting for the next 20 years going, well, at some point, people are going to recognise that these animals are equal as humans to having the right to be free, then that's 20, 30, 40 years worth of animals suffering to such a degree in such terrible conditions. And I'm not saying that there won't be birds that are suffering in free-range farms. That is not what I'm saying. But if you put somebody in isolation versus in a cell block with 2 or 3 people, a bit of space, or in a cell block where they get to go outside twice a day, or versus they get to go out all day and then just come back at night, I think we as people would all choose, not to be in self-isolation or not to be in a cell with 2 people for the whole of our lives versus having some space so I can at least have some moments where I'm not feeling absolutely horrific. And that is why it's so important that we have to remove these worst systems and move us to a trajectory where, I really hope that there is a future, and it's not far away, where we don't have animals farmed for meat and dairy. But I'm not willing to sit by and see those animals in cages right now, knowing that there is an alternative that could be a bit better for them.
Right. So there's kind of like 2 points here that, like, you do have the belief that welfare reform helps us get closer to abolition because it creates that cultural shift and that attitude change where people recognize that animals actually matter morally. So you think we're closer to abolition now probably than we were before we were even studying animals before slaughter. But the other point you're raising is that, well, there's like the direct suffering reduction. I feel like perhaps in the vegan community, perhaps we can become so focused on like the end goal or the vegan ideology that maybe we lose sight of the fact that there is a difference between being tortured at the end of your life and like dying with less pain. There is a difference between being crammed into a cage or a farrowing crate and being outside. And I mean, it matters because it matters to the animals, just as it would matter how we die to us. We should be able to say that less suffering is better. We should be able to say that not being in a cage is better than being in a cage, even if the situation right now where the animal isn't in a cage isn't okay and isn't ethical. I don't think there's a contradiction there. And I guess also in the way that we come across to non-vegans and people who aren't in the animal advocacy movement, it kind of comes across as less dogmatic to be able to acknowledge things like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I know I mentioned veganuary already, but I think that just seeing the level of uptake of that recognition by people that they actually want to do more for animals and be better, and taking that month to do that. You know, I've got friends that nowhere in a million years I thought I've been banging on about this for years and years, and now they are. You know, they do veganuary or they've given up meat completely or whatever it might be. And I think you do see that shift. And you talked about people relinquishing or, you know, going back to eating meat and things. A lot of that is due to societal pressure. And it's just not easy to be vegan as it is to be a meat eater. And so I think as more people try it, we have more products, it's easier, it's less socially stigmatized, you know, the food's very tasty, they don't have to compromise. It's all part of this whole movement towards where we want to be.
Yeah. There's no reason to necessarily believe that the welfarists are the enemy of like the veganism as the end goal. I think when I first became vegan, I had more black and white thinking, I think. So I was very confident that, you know, what's happening to animals is terrible, regardless of how it's done. And they know that probably is the case in reality, that like even like the humane farms, like they're still causing a hell of a lot of suffering to animals. But my line of thinking led me to kind of missing nuance and just saying like it's all as bad as each other. And I'm trying to think of like an analogy that works. It's kind of like we should be able to say that stealing £10 from your grandma is better than stealing £1,000. And working towards to make sure that the grandma loses £10 rather than £1,000 is like a good thing to do, but it doesn't mean you're saying that like stealing is okay and that stealing £10 is okay. It's just like a significant difference, and it matters to the grandma just like it matters to the animals. So yeah, I think that's something that should probably be talked about more often in like the grassroots community. But either way, I guess like, I mean, I'm kind of repeating myself here, but we should be able to there are many welfarists who are abolitionists as well. And they just think that it's going to get us towards it. So towards the end goal of abolition. So we should be able to have like an open dialogue without kind of like acting like people are the enemy, I think.
Absolutely. I think that's key. And I think the moment you shame someone, they're never going to hear what you're saying. They're only going to be defensive. So it is about bringing people on a journey, listening. I understand that black and white thinking. I think everyone goes through it to some degree when they suddenly see the system for what it is and how we use animals and the scale of it. It's very normal to have that almost anger in yourself because you've been complicit in this without realizing it. And then also once I tell everyone, surely they're not going to want to be complicit either. And unfortunately, it just isn't that simple. So
I was talking to a friend the other day about the topics of this podcast. And he was saying like one of the things that he finds like really distasteful is when we get a welfare reform in an organization like KFC or McDonald's or like a new plant-based product, activists will kind of like celebrate this, like KFC are doing a great thing. And like when these organizations are causing such astronomical amounts of animal suffering, there's something that's kind of off-putting about that. And I guess they're worrying about things like complacency and like reinforcing speciesism, because if we imagine like a an organization that's really causing a lot of harm to humans, we probably wouldn't be like patting them on the back if they have like, they commit to having slightly better conditions in like 7 years time or something. I'm wondering if you have like mixed feelings, like when we like see a welfare reform or a new plant-based product and we like celebrate it when that company is still causing such a large amount of suffering.
Well, there's 2 points here. There's the personal level where I sometimes struggle, like going into certain food chains where I'm like, really? Am I going to eat here? But I think, yeah, if we want to make change, sometimes you have to bring people along. And if all we do is tell them, no matter what you do, it's not good enough, you are the enemy, we're back to shaming again, and we're back to not making any progress. And you know, if we look at some of the companies, I'm trying to think of some companies now, like take Leon, for instance, started off with a very vast array of different meats and a small array of vegetarian, vegan, and they're aiming for like, maybe I think it's like 50% of their menu to be vegan, vegetarian. We should be applauding that. We should be encouraging that. We should be telling people this is a brand that's doing good, because it will bring other brands to want to do good as well, because they see it as marketing. It is. Yeah, it can be an uncomfortable place to be. I would, you know, there are days when I would love to be like, absolutely do not consume products from this place. Like they have caused an awful lot of harm, but that is not going to help the animals that are going to be going in those systems for the next 10 years. What is going to help is making sure these companies realize that if they make progress, if they help improve these systems, they will see a level of uplift in terms of recognition for the expense they're putting in, but also knowing that they're doing the right thing and it's being recognized for that, and then taking them and continuing on that journey. We never stop the conversation. It's not like, oh, you committed, okay, great. No, there's huge amounts of accountability that go on the back of this. You can't simply just get the good PR and walk away. That's not going to work for us. So we have accountability campaigns, and we don't expect, this is the long game to some degree, hoping that technology will come in and help us speed up much more rapidly at some point towards a lot less farming and a lot more plant-based or cultivated meat. I'm just going to put the blind down because the sun's coming over there.
Sure. Yeah, I can see it in your eyes.
Is that all right?
Looks like you're suffering. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Bit squinty.
One point I've heard mentioned is that, like, okay, like welfare reform is helpful, but we should, when messaging about success stories, we should keep abolition as part of the message as the end goal. But like when I look at organizations working in welfare reform, or like people celebrating welfare reform, it seems like often it's not included in the messaging that like, okay, this is a step towards like abolition. And I'm wondering like what you think about that, whether you have an opinion on whether it's like tactically better to do that or not to do that.
Marketing is its own world, really. I'm not a comms person, so probably better to speak to our head of comms, Hannah. But, you know, there's a limited amount of information you have to get across in a very limited amount of time. And the reality is people take the headlines nearly always and don't really read the full context regardless. So I would be interested to see a company that would want to be messaging like, we've done this, but obviously we're working towards blah, blah, blah. I just don't think it's realistic. And if you take the gay rights movement, and this is where there are always fractions in movements. There are always fractions because we need people at the front and people at the back to be driving us forward. So we're always going to be better and we're always going to be dragging up the worst. And so in that, there was people that said like, look, we just want to not be persecuted. And then once that came in, well, we should have the same rights of civil partnership. Well, actually, we want marriage. Actually, as it happens, and you know, and within that there was also things around law about discrimination and things. And so had it been that they had started the message, well, we want to get married, you know, back in 1970s, of course they were thinking that, but like that wasn't going to be a message that was going to be taken on at the time in the general public. There would have been, well, there still are, unfortunately, but you know, much more. Whereas there's, you know, we have a law now where marriage is possible. Like I said, we're not at the place we need to be within gay rights, but that advancement and seeing that how it's changed has come about from those step changes and not because they just stood there and said, we want marriage, we want marriage, we want marriage.
Right, yeah. One piece of evidence that I found compelling was that I think it was Sentience Institute who did research suggesting that information about welfare reform reduces intention to eat animal products. And I sent you, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but I sent you some research, some new research by Sentience Institute, which isn't peer reviewed, but what does peer review matter anyway? I'm joking. That's a joke. Don't quote me on that. But it's not gone to the peer review process yet. But it suggested that information about welfare reforms did not increase opposition to animal farming, which was a surprise to me, given like the previous research. So like, I guess that piece of evidence it's updated my belief, or like updated my confidence in the belief that like welfare reform helps us get to abolition. I'm like slightly less certain, but overall I still do think that welfare reform is a great thing in towards getting incremental steps to get to abolition, but also for like the direct suffering reduction that you mentioned. But I'm wondering like if you had a look at that study and if you have any thoughts.
I did. There was a lot of things that were like non-significant as well. So I think at the end they said like they needed to do a lot more research into this. The numbers were very low that they surveyed. So I'm a little bit sort of, I love the Sentience Institute and what they're producing and things. I think we need to be asking these questions, because how on earth are we going to know what's right or wrong, and be able to, like say, update your knowledge on these things. But I struggled to come out of a conclusion of that, given the size of the study and kind of what it was showing, and then not significance. There's a lot of people that take part, in giving up meat, not necessarily because of animals, but because of the environment or because of their own health, for instance, that they want to try it. I've had a number of friends that have done it for the environment. They felt like they couldn't tell their children like that I wanted to help prevent climate change and the degree of climate change that's happening, so that they can't consume animals and say that to their children. But once they took a step out of that and were no longer part of the system, they could then sort of look and say like, oh God, the blinkers came down almost, and like, oh God, yeah, like, I mean, I also wouldn't consume animals because now I realise like how terrible the system is regardless of the system. Like, I don't want to be part of that. And I think, I'm not really entirely sure how this brings back to that paper, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is a degree of, you can show people any farming system and they still go and consume that meat regardless. And it's actually once they almost step out of it that's when they can see that any system is bad, or one system, So, and I think it comes back to where we are as a society and where we're going. Climate change will definitely have an impact on people's diets, is having an impact on people's diets, certainly in the West, in Europe, for instance. And if we take Sweden, the home of Greta, their consumption of chicken is going down year on year, which is incredible because it's not happening anywhere else. But there's probably a Greta effect off the back of that. And there's also, Rat, who's been there, the oldest animal rights group in the whole of the world, amazing group that have been there lobbying about this for a long time. But so I guess I don't think that us celebrating KFC making a commitment to improve the welfare of broiler chickens is going to make people consume more chicken. I think that us doing that for KFC might mean that McDonald's also commit, because they also don't want to be seen as the bad guy. So we've just helped hundreds of millions of birds every year that are suffering in broiler chicken farms. And people need to have a bigger picture of just what consuming animals does to the environment, to their health, and to the animals themselves, and move from that. And we need to get businesses wanting to move away from reliance on chicken products as their main staple, take KFC, for instance, and moving towards more plant-based options that they offer people. And then people can, to me, it's just like, it's interesting to do this work. And if you show them a picture of a factory farm versus like a higher welfare system, does this change their eating habits and things? But fundamentally, this goes back to this institutional change, because individuals, we all are the same in the sense that one day we might think one thing, and the other day we might think something else. And when you interview people, you don't know what you're getting. And if you're only going to interview 150 people, it's not a great study to kind of take like learnings from, I guess. And they say that themselves. They say in the paper, like, we want to do a much larger study for us to be able to take anything from this science.
Yeah. So on that point, I mean, Sentience Institute in 2017 did like, I'm sure you will have heard of this, a survey that suggested that 49% of US Americans supported a ban on factory farming, which is like, wow, that's amazing. Like that can't be true. And then it was replicated. But in the same study, 60% of people said that eating meat is a personal choice. So it's like, it seems like somewhat like paradoxical, I guess. And one does wonder like how much of it would actually equate to like, you know, a vote. If you had to vote on factory farming, would they actually put their behavior in line with what they're saying? But actually, I mean, in Switzerland, there is going to be a vote on factory farming, so that'd be very interesting. I'm sure there's going to be a big difference. I don't think it's going to be 49% voting to abolish it, but that would be interesting.
It is interesting also where you draw on the line and where factory farming is in terms of the level, because if you look at Switzerland, they have actually much higher welfare standards than nearly any country across a lot of species. So I think it'll be really, really interesting to see what comes from that. I'm so excited for that to come through to fruition.
Yeah, perhaps the fact that they have like such high welfare standards compared to the rest of the world, and they're having a conversation about the abolition of factory farming is like another piece of evidence in favor of like welfarism not being like a net negative impact on getting to abolition. But we talked about broiler chickens a little bit there, and I'm wondering if you could maybe give me like an overview on what the situation is like for broiler chickens, what their lives are like, and how they're dying.
So in the UK alone, we slaughter over 1.1 billion chickens every year. And so in a shed, you will have 20, 30, 40,000 birds in one shed. They'll be placed there a day old, and they have been bred in such a way that their genetics means they grow far faster than any other, than any regular chicken, one that you would just find, would grow. And so if you put it in real terms, it would be the equivalent, we slaughter them around 5 or 6 weeks of age. It would be the equivalent of a toddler being the size of a tiger by the time they're 2 months old. That is the rapid growth rate that we have these birds under. And what that does is it puts a huge amount of strain on the bird's body. So it shifts their gravity because we prefer breast muscle as the meat to consume. It's over twice the size it should be, so that shifts the bird's gravity forward. That puts a lot of pressure on the hips and legs of the birds. So we see that at 4 or 5 weeks of age, up to a third of these birds could be lame. They could be suffering from painful leg conditions. And they suffer from burns on their foot pads. So because when they go into the shed, they are just put there and then they're only removed once they're going to slaughter. They are on this sawdust, it's called litter, this sawdust litter, that should absorb any excrement. But, of course, as that builds up, as the chickens get older, and there are tens of thousands in a shed, that causes the ammonia burns, because these birds are either, because their bodies are so challenging to lift and move and cause so much pain, they either are resting on the litter where they put their feet and their hocks and their breasts, and so we call them breast blisters and foot pad dermatitis and hock burns, literally burns on the hocks of the birds from the ammonia. We see high levels of this in these factory farm chickens because they're either resting, if they're not resting, they're eating, then they're back to resting. And that is their life. We see that after 2 weeks of age, but chickens like to perch high at night to feel safe. It's a very innate behaviour that they have. They'll just go to roost. But, I mean, these chicken farms, they don't have that. But if they do provide like a small perch on the floor, after 2 weeks of age, these birds are so immobile that they don't really use the perches. Now, a story I love is that there's farmers that have been shifting their breed to a higher welfare breed. So they're slightly slower growing. It means that they don't suffer from the level of lameness, the same level of foot pads and ammonia burns and all those other things as well. And so it's really the case that this farmer had only ever had, there's only a few breeds, these intensive breeds for the whole world. So there's like 3 breeds. And then he got given this higher welfare breed to raise. And he said, I didn't realise this is what chickens were like. Like, I didn't realise that they were so inquisitive and that they wanted to play and that they moved around, because these chickens don't. They just sit, and that is their life. And they're basically we call it like a physiological cage. They're trapped in their own body because mentally they want to do all the stimulation of a little chick, because like these are 5-week-old birds. They want to be running around and foraging and doing all these things. And instead they're taken away. They have no mother, which in itself is distressing for them, shows they have more anxiety. And they have to grow and just exist in these barns, and they have very little space. And by the time they get to 5 or 6 weeks of age, they're so compressed because there's so many and they're so big that they actually can't spread out their wings as they'd want to in that shed. We actually in the UK, predominantly the sheds have natural light, which is important. It helps the birds move. It's nicer for them. But around the world, typically they don't have any natural light. They actually have very low light levels to keep the birds relatively rested. And then they go to the slaughterhouse, as in the conditions I described before, with the water bath stunning and the horrors that goes on there as well. So that is farming for broilers, and they make up the vast majority of all the animals farmed for food around the world, around 90%, because their numbers are in the billions. And so if we can get these welfare reforms, get these birds, so we have something called the Better Chicken Commitment. It is to improve the welfare of the breed, it's to give them more space, it's to give them enrichment, it's to ensure they have natural light, and it's to improve their slaughter conditions. That is the higher welfare systems that we want to see, and we want to see that as a baseline, not as it is all about raising the bar and moving from the worst to an improved system.
The situation you just described for, I guess I should have mentioned at the start, like broiler chickens is chickens raised for meat, isn't it? In case people aren't like fully aware of that, as opposed to like egg laying chickens. So the situation you just described, is that like the kind of average situation for a chicken in the United Kingdom?
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean I feel like we often talk about securing attitude change in like animal advocacy circles, and how do we get people to like care more about what's happening to animals? But I feel like the situation you just described is like so horrific. Like a member of the general public would not think that was okay. It's kind of highlighting to me like this huge gap between what the public opinion is and what they think it's okay to do to animals, and like the reality of animal farming. And to some extent, it seems like a large part of what we need to do is not to get the attitude change, but just to bring what's actually happening to animals in line with the current attitude towards what people think is okay to do to animals. That sounds really terrible. I'm wondering, so when we talk about the slaughter of the broiler chickens, what are like the typical ways they're dying, and like what are the different options in terms of stunning and killing, and how bad do you think each of these are for the chicken?
Do you want to just do the UK or more broadly?
Let's stick with the UK for like time reasons.
No problem. Okay, so UK, predominantly now actually, we use controlled atmospheric stunning. So it's around 30% water bath stunning, which is the system I described earlier in the interview. And then controlled atmospheric stunning makes up the majority. In Europe, that's not the case. It's the vast majority, 80-something%, is water bath stunning. And in the UK, and much smaller amount is controlled atmospheric stunning. Now, water bath stunning, worst system there is, was actually invented for speed and not for welfare. It was originally like, we've created factory farming, how are we going to kill all these thousands of chickens quickly? Okay, let's do this. And then it was like, okay, but actually stunning them effectively, not immobilizing them, which happens sometimes, is good for welfare because they then won't feel the throat being cut. So water bath stunning. Controlled atmospheric stunning is an improvement. It is either using 2 different types of gas. So there's carbon dioxide, or there's inert gases, like argon, for instance. Now, carbon dioxide, there's different ways of doing it. We asked for a multi-stage system. So over a certain level, 40% carbon dioxide is very aversive to chickens. Now, people might be thinking, what about pigs? Hang on, we want to ban CO2 for pigs. Different situation, I can explain that if you want me to go into it in detail there. But for chickens, over 40% becomes aversive. So what we say is, and what most systems now use to a degree, and what we're pushing for is this multi-stage where they don't go any higher. They can only go 30 to 40%, no higher than 40%, until the birds are unconscious. And then they increase the CO2 higher once they're unconscious. I think it's like 80%. And that will kill the birds. Now, In argon, it's a little different. There's mixed science as to whether inert gases are aversive to the birds or not aversive to the birds. It's a similar sort of system, basically, and it's the same thing. So what we see in those systems is around 10 seconds of noticing and potentially being distressed at the gas and lack of oxygen, right? Mm-hmm. But after that, it's over, they're stunned, and then they're dead. And so that is the improvement system. Actually, there's work going on for an even better system, hopefully, that's electric stun without the inversion of the birds. Because again, the CO2 one, the birds never get hung up by their legs until they're dead. They stay in their crates, so they don't get handled, which is very stressful for the birds, let alone being put upside down, which happens with the shackles for the water bath stunning. So that's another good point about this system. But what we might get is a system that is birds in the crates, they come out, they don't get turned upside down, there's no inversion, and each individual bird is stunned through the skull with an electric shock, and the system works so well, we do know this, that it can make sure that the stun is effective every time. Now that will be the best system that we can probably produce, and that's something that's being worked on right now. So fingers crossed for that. And halal is a subject that comes up a lot in the UK. And there are two halal bodies that kind of certify halal food. And the halal food authorities do allow for stunning of birds as long as they're not killed at the point of stunning. They need to have a heartbeat, but they can be unconscious. Gas stunning is problematic for that, because the birds often may die. Or do, whereas this electric head-only stun system will allow the birds to have a heartbeat when their throats are cut, but be unconscious. So again, that is a great system, and a system that can go to places like Thailand and the Middle East and all these other places that produce vast volumes of chicken, and actually be not too much of an expensive system that they can put in that will allow these birds to be stunned. Right.
So am I right in saying that the way that to kill chickens is prevalent over Europe, with it's a live shackle slaughter, which involves a significant percentage of chickens being boiled alive, potentially 3%, and when you consider the scale of the chickens going through the system, that's actually a lot of individuals going through that.
Millions, yeah.
Right. The controlled atmospheric stunning, you're saying, is better, and that's more prevalent in the United Kingdom. Significantly better than being boiled alive, but still, it's not like it's suffering free. There could be around 10 minutes of unpleasantness for the chickens.
10 seconds.
Sorry, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah, it's okay, I just want to make sure. No, yeah.
Classic vegan propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I corrected myself when I said humane slaughter versus more humane slaughter. It is more humane. Is there such a thing as humane slaughter? No.
Other than the stunning process, do you think there's any low-hanging fruit that could be implemented at any stage of the production process for broiler chickens? So either at the farm or the transport or the slaughter process that you think could make a huge difference to the welfare of chickens?
I mean, giving them a lot more space would. Having less birds in the shed to start with and having a lot more space is a really easy one. But then the pushback is, we need more sheds, or we need to consume less chicken. I mean, we all need, as a nation, to consume less protein that comes from meat products. We absolutely eat far too much, and you're hard pressed to meet anyone who doesn't say, actually, probably as a nation, we need to reduce the actual production of meat and animals, and chickens are a huge part of that.
Yeah, what's a real concern, I guess, is that when we're considering the welfare of how these different species are kept, it seems like chickens and smaller animals like chickens and fish tend to be treated the worst, and larger animals like cows seem to be treated a bit better on average. And also, when you look at the amount of calories you get per animal, it seems like you harm less animals by eating those products. It's kind of concerning then that while I think meat consumption generally in the UK I've heard is going down, but the consumption of chickens is increasing. Perhaps because with the environmental argument, I suppose it could make sense to consume chickens rather than beef. But it's kind of sad because it seems perhaps we're causing more farmed animal suffering than ever because we're consuming so much more chicken now.
Yeah, and I think people don't, I mean, these chickens can be fed soya from the Amazon rainforest. Like, what are we doing? Really? You know, it is an interesting one. And I think going back to what you're saying about the low hanging fruit, when we ask for the better chicken commitment from companies, to us, this is the basic level of welfare these birds should be provided at a minimum. And it isn't that complex, to be honest. You know, the RSPCA Assured label has been doing this for years and has the breeds, and we have the breeds ready. We know the space they should be given. We know they have natural light now, which is great. We know they should be given more enrichment. And we know these, you know, there's a reason the UK has moved to controlled atmospheric stunning versus water bust. We know that's the better system than it should be. So it is all really, in some sense, low-hanging fruit. Companies need to. But there is this, like you said, the narrative that people should move to chicken versus beef for the climate, for instance. And I think it's only recently the environmental movement's been like, plant-based is where you should be going. And I think that's been a problem for us for a number of years, where people have sort of said, well, beef uses more water, so consume chickens. Like, no, just no. Like, that's, you know, sustainability is also not just about the environment. Sustainability has moral weighting in it as well. And morally, we cannot be consuming these chickens. Like, that's not sustainable in a sustainable system.
Yeah, I feel like if you reflect on it, you come to the realization that like the reason the environment matters is because it has implications for like the well-being of the individuals who live on the planet. It's not like the rock just floating through the universe has like intrinsic value. I don't think. Or maybe like the way in which we talk about the planet and like, you know, calling her Mother Earth with a capital M. Maybe we kind of, in the language we use, environmentalists use, does suggest that like the planet matters in and of itself, regardless of the individuals who live on it, which doesn't make any sense to me. But like one thing I would be interested in, I guess, is to pick your brain on like how you actually get these large corporations to commit to these welfare commitments, because that seems to be like perhaps the most success that the Humane League has had. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it seems like you guys get a lot of attention for getting large organizations to commit to these welfare changes.
So we do outreach to these companies. We go and meet with these companies and we highlight why they should be making this change. We highlight the cruelty that's involved. We highlight that consumers, when told about the cruelty, don't want the cruelty. And we say that, you know, we're here to say, like, we want you to make this commitment, but we're also here to say that if you don't make this commitment, we will highlight to the general public exactly what you are complicit in, which is these cruel systems and this abuse of animals. And so there are companies that are forward-thinking, that recognise, let's get on with this, we should be doing this, let's do it. And there are companies that do that. And then there are companies that seem to think that, no, it's going to be fine. And they're the companies that we will launch public-facing campaigns and we will highlight to their customers, to their consumers, exactly what they're complicit in. They will show them images of hens in cages or broiler chickens on factory farms or live shackle slaughter. And as we know, when people actually see it, they're pretty horrified. And those campaigns may last a day. We've had day-long campaigns, we've had week-long campaigns, we've had year-long campaigns. But we will not stop and we will not rest until those companies make the commitment. And so if we take Yum Brands, for instance, in a number of countries, so Yum Brands own KFC, they own Taco Bell, they own, I want to say Yo Sushi, but I might be wrong on that one. Anyway, they had commitments in many countries for cage-free, but not globally. We don't see, you know, if they're in every nation, then every nation should be cage-free. And so we launched a campaign. Now we started something called the Open Wing Alliance. Now the Open Wing Alliance aims to free all hens from cages around the world. We have over 70 odd organisations as part of this Open Wing Alliance. We share all our learnings and our mistakes with these organisations, and we have a community on Slack where we're sharing information and we're helping each other. And we sometimes launch these global campaigns, and that was a global campaign we launched against Yum last year. And thanks to the amazing activists around the world who went out and protested on the street or protested via social media. After 2 months, we got Yum Brands to commit to a global commitment to go cage-free. And that is the power of activism and the power of people and the power of showing the shame that these companies should have for using these systems and not committing to remove them from their supply chain.
Do you feel like the biggest driver in getting these organizations to make these commitments is the worry about public opinion, as opposed to other factors like actually learning about the suffering of the chickens and like caring?
Well, I mean, everyone's an individual. So you go to an organisation, you meet individuals, they often themselves care, but they're part of an organisation and directors and everything else. So you often meet individuals that really do care and they want to do this, they want to be part of this change. You see businesses that see, this is actually like beneficial for us. One, we don't get campaigned against, which is going to be a massive headache. And also, two, we can use this as a marketing tool to show that we're making progress in the right direction, that we're a company that cares about people and about animals and etc. So it varies on what people's motivations are. I definitely think the campaigning part is the massive headache where they go, I mean, do we want to keep going, or is it just going to be easier for us to make this change and then they'll leave us alone for however long? So yeah, I think different companies do it for different reasons. But
the idea of them like thinking, okay, we can use this as a marketing tool to like show that we're doing good things. I was going to ask about that because it wasn't obvious to me that would be the case. Say if they say, okay, look, we're no longer keeping hens in cages. I'd imagine the public would be like, so you've been keeping hens in cages for like the last 10 years? I don't know. I wondered if these companies would rather that the public just didn't think about what's happening to the animals and didn't think about welfare. But in your experience, you think that they actually do use this as a marketing tool. Like they'll message their customers saying like, look, we've committed to going cage free.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the company. There's an amazing organisation called East in Taiwan, and they work with Carrefour. And then Carrefour put posters up saying like, we're not going to use this anymore. We're only going to use cage-free hens. We're banning this system. You know, they were very proud of themselves for saying like, no, we're making a stand and we're going to ban this system. So I think it just depends on the attitude thing and obviously how you convey that marketing. I think that companies will do it because they don't want it to be associated with being bad. You know, we bloody up their logo, we make them very bad. They don't want that to be in the psyche of their consumers. They want, you know, if they can have a competitive edge, there's the forward-thinking companies that are like, well, okay, let's use this opportunity to take the company forward in the direction we should be going anyway. And then there's ones that are just like, this is making our life extremely difficult. We haven't got time for this. This is going to be easier. So it's varying degrees, but whatever happens is we don't rest. We launch these campaigns, be it in the UK, Europe-wide, or globally, until we get these companies to commit.
Sure, yeah. Since we've just come into 2022, maybe it'd be good to talk about some positives. So like maybe like over the last 5 years, what do you think are some of the things that have gone well, some of the wins for animals and some of the signs of progress?
I mean, the cage-free movement around the world is incredible, I think. If we look at the US and where it was 2016, vast, 90-something percentage of birds and hens, in cages. And now we're at only 2/3. We're a third of birds out of cages in the US. I think if you met people in 2015, they probably would have said it's not possible. And it's happened very quickly, in those 5 years. It's incredible. I think we've just had the European Union pledge that they may end cages for animals across Europe. That's incredible. We'll see what happens with that, but that is incredible step forward that we have not seen for a very long time from Europe. Fishes are now being seen as sentient, and there's now a lot more work on them, and there is a push by industry as well as animal rights activists to improve these conditions for fishes. That's a big step forward. We had the UK government say that there's sentience in decapods and cephalopods. Mm-hmm. Amazing! That's fantastic. Yeah. This is real progress. That there seems to be a quick movement. We have had a lull for a bit of time, and now it seems to be getting a bit quicker. I'm really hopeful with the investments that we're seeing in cultivated meat or plant-based options. That investment is doubling up every year on year. That's really exciting. I think that, it doesn't directly affect animals, right? Well, to some degree it does, but that has real implications for the future. We've seen countries like Germany and other countries put in bans for cages, full stop, for hens. And then we've seen them, I think it was Germany and France, ban male chick culling in the future. I think Italy's also put something in for that as well. So we've got, I was just going to say, there's one other thing with broiler chickens, in that time, the last 5 years, we've created the Better Chicken Commitment, and we've got hundreds of companies, including KFC in Europe, to commit to higher welfare chicken for the Better Chicken Commitment. And that is incredible and affects billions of birds. So we are seeing real progress.
Yeah, I suppose I think things you've highlighted fall into three categories. There's the welfare reform, with examples being like the commitments to go cage free. Then there's the plant-based alternatives like the cultivated meat, and just generally just like plant-based alternatives are booming. I mean, I live in London, so perhaps this isn't this is a biased sample.
No, I travel a lot. It's not. It's good. Yeah.
And then we have like the policy changes, like the European Union suggesting they're going to make changes, and the British government recognizing crustaceans as like sentient. It seems to me that the Humane League has focused significantly more on getting companies to change their practices as opposed to policy, governmental policy change. Am I right in thinking that? And is there a reason?
We have, like I said before, we start welfare reforms in industry, but we also have that government as the end goal kind of thing. So in the US, the Humane League's been very involved in getting those Prop 12s and other legislation to ban cages for both laying hens and for and sow crates for sows. And then here in the UK, we've started Beatrice's campaigns aimed cages for hens, and then we're also working on the legislation for fishes at stunning, so the slaughter. Pardon me. So it is all part of the work that we do. I would say predominantly our work is welfare reform. Some of it is governmental because it just takes a lot more work to do the campaigns for the industry. But once you have the industry, the government stuff should come quicker, which is where we're at with cages in the UK, where we've got all major companies committed to go cage free. Vast majority of those that made commitments have either followed through or then they're on the right way to 2025 deadline. That leaves us space to now, lobby the government, public awareness campaigns, get signatures. You can go on our website if you want to, the Humane League .org.uk, and sign for Beatrice's bill so that we can ban cages for laying hens. And so that work is important. And in the US, we're launching a policy department that's going to be working on grassroots activism in different states to get law after law to improve welfare for farmed animals.
Hey, a lot going on.
Yeah, busy.
Yeah. When I talk to people who are very positive about reaching the end of animal farming, they often seem to fall into two categories, where people think that technological advancements are going to bring the end of animal farming, like cultured meat, and other people, I suppose more in my circle, people seem to have a focus on like moral persuasion. And I'm wondering if you have an opinion on like which of these is going to be more impactful.
I think we need it all, to be honest. I think that's why I worry when people say we should just go down one rabbit hole. I think it just isn't the case. We need to be making these improvements. We need to be having these conversations. We need this to be in the psyche of people so that they're ready when the cultivated meat and everything else is really at a point of bang on, like good taste, good texture, healthy, good for you, not too expensive. They're ready to receive that. And if we don't do one or the other, then it's not going to work.
That makes sense. Yeah, we should definitely put our balls in both court, if that's the right saying. I'm not sure that is. That sounds kind of weird. But yeah, I guess because what I care about is like the more like the ethics. I'm like biased to want to focus on moral persuasion. Also like technological advancements. I'm not even sure like what I'd be doing. Like it's hard enough for me to set up this podcast in a way that like works. So, but I guess like I do think there's reasons to like favor moral persuasion in like if we take like a long-term perspective. where, technological advancements could get us out of factory farming, but there are still other ethical issues that like need to be solved. Like I talk a lot about wild animal suffering on my channel. And if we can get people to care about like individual animals, farmed animals, then I think that has implications further down the road for like whether we should be helping wild animals who need our help as well. And also like there are, terrible things that could happen in the future. We could cause astronomical digital sentience, for instance, could be a problem. So yeah, I do think that like there are reasons to think that like moral persuasion could be more impactful in the long run, but I guess it's kind of intertwined. It's like you were saying before, people might go vegan or vegetarian for health reasons, and then they're more open to the ethical arguments. Likewise, we might end factory farming with technology, which then makes people more open to the moral persuasion. But actually, since I've mentioned wild animals, I'm wondering if the topic of wild animals has ever come up at the Humane League.
That's a good question. There's wild animal suffering in factory farming in the sense of fishes, for instance, where fishes are fed other fish, wild caught fish, and that's problematic. We focus on factory farming. We have solutions that can help alleviate suffering right now, today. And so that's our focus. And there are other groups that are looking at the longer picture, like you say, which is the wild animal suffering. How do we start to look at this? What can we do without causing other suffering to others? And in factory farming, we don't have the same dilemma in that sense. There's quite clear-cut things we can do that will improve welfare without necessarily causing implications for other species that may also suffer, so to speak. So that's why we focus on factory farming right now, and other groups are kind of taking the more research-led, longer view, looking at wild animals. And as you say, we'll take people on that journey, the psyche of the world, and hopefully they're ready for the message of wild animal suffering as well at some point.
For sure, yeah. I guess like one of the difficulties in trying to think about how we can most effectively create positive change in the world is that there can be so many different knock-on effects for like other beings that we're not directly affecting. And like welfare reform, I guess another reason why welfare reform could be like a good area to focus on is because like if you take chickens out of cages and they're living better lives, you're probably not going to be affecting like the lives of wild animals, or it probably isn't going to be causing problems further down the line. Like this is like super counterintuitive, and maybe it'll sound a bit crazy, but like one concern is that we kind of abolish factory farming and we like rewild all of the space, not considering the perspective of the individual wild animals and how their lives might actually be. And we could end up like causing more suffering, which is like super scary. So I guess it could come the case that like as the farmed animal movement progresses, the question of wild animals is something that becomes more prevalent and is kind of more clearly something that needs to be on our mind, because there could be implications for affecting the lives of wild animals as well, even if we were just to like solve factory farming.
I mean, it's a good argument. Yeah, I have heard that one before. I guess it depends on the individual and how they see suffering and being so complicit in suffering versus what would have been there if we weren't there anyway, taking control. So.
For sure. Whereas like I can understand how intuitively people might think, I'm only obligated not to like cause harm. But like from my perspective, or from the perspective of the victim, the animal, I don't think it makes a difference to them whether they're suffering from a disease that's human caused or like naturally occurring. So but I imagine because the Humane League are so focused on like helping animals, they would probably be interested in considering like the implications for the work you guys do on wild animals in the future. But can you imagine the Humane League ever doing work like directly to help wild animals? Like say if we did manage to abolish like animal abuse on farms?
That's a great question. I would never want to rule out anything. We're here to help animals. And I think if there's science that shows directly what impact we can do and what impact we can make on wild animals that will reduce suffering, then absolutely. If we've abolished factory farming or farming altogether, then yeah, that is, I guess, the next frontier, isn't it? But who knows?
Sure,
but it's very hard to predict the next 40 years. I think we're in a time of great uncertainty around a lot of things. But one thing is for sure, we're in the right direction for ending factory farming.
Sure. We've talked a lot about like a potential shift in focus towards institutional change versus individual change. One of the things I wonder about is like the activist who started off as like a normal vegan activist who was on the street talking to people. I think it can be hard. One of the reasons why just going to the street and talking to people was like, I think kind of blew up was because it was like so easy. It's kind of like so easy to get involved in. You just go there with a laptop and talk to people about what's happening to animals. For animal advocates who want to use their time to effectively help animals, but aren't sure like what to do or where to start, are there any like suggestions you'd make?
Yeah, so I mean, that form of activism can be very confronting for a lot of people and quite challenging, I think, for people to deal with. So the form of activism that we promote within the Humane League is we have a fast action network. So again, you can go to our website and you can check out the fast action network there. If you sign up, you'll get emails once or twice a week about actions you can take online that can help move our campaigns forward. So it might be to write to a company and say this, or to put a post on Facebook about something else, or to share a petition. Or we also do in-person protests. They're always peaceful, always. In fact, when we did one against, we've got a week against Morrisons next week. We're trying to get them to commit to the Better Chicken commitment. And the previous one we did, we're peaceful. We stand out with placards just showing what factory farming looks like. And are very clear when we talk to the store managers what we're asking for. And often those store managers completely agree with us. So like, I'm going to speak to my manager. I think we should be signing up to this as well. I don't think we should be selling this chicken either. So so you can do these kind of peaceful protests where it's not about necessarily engaging with the public so much. Obviously, people will come up to you and ask or say, yeah, I really support your thing or whatever. But it's a little less confronting than it can be when you have to do those kind of talking to people time and time again. So that's our form of activism. We're also doing work on policy, obviously, so writing to your MP or getting a meeting with your MP as well to discuss why it's important they should care about whatever it is, like ending cages for hens or fishes, etc. So there's multiple things you can do, be it, if you don't have access to a computer, you can do writing handwritten letters to your MP or to companies. If you've got a computer and you've got social media, you can utilize social media to highlight your voice and get shares and likes and everything else through that kind of projects a message about the company. And you can join us on in-person protests as well. And we have these things called action parties, where once a month we get together as a group. Used to be in person, obviously pre-COVID. Post-COVID, we have options, depending on what COVID's doing, either to be in person and have like a little get-together where you meet fellow activists and kind of do online stuff there, or write letters and things, or we do online action parties where we'll kind of get together in the evening and do something. So there's lots of different options, and I recommend checking out our website if you're interested.
Yeah, so it sounds like people can sign up to things on the Humane League and then be sent opportunities to get involved in institutional change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that sounds really great. I'll definitely be putting the links in the description. And to be clear, is this for like the UK specifically, or is this like an option for anyone if they weren't living in the UK, they could still get involved like this?
Oh, well, the Fast Action Network is open to anyone around the world, absolutely, because if you've got a social media platform, then it's doable. Some of the petitions are UK based, some not. If you're in the US, we have the Humane League in the US as well, just .org instead of .org.uk, and we have a Fast Action Network there. We also have an organisation in Mexico doing the same, and in Japan as well. And then check out the Open Wing Alliance. There are different organisations in many different countries that also have fast action networks. So if you're in France, check out L214, for instance. They're an amazing organisation. Get involved with them. So that there's lots of different opportunities.
Wonderful, great. Well, I think that's a good place to end it. So thank you so much for finding the time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank you for everything you're doing. I think the Humane League and everything you guys are doing there is really making a difference and really making the world a better place. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for your time today. It's been really lovely, and I really enjoy your podcast. So it's an honour to be on here. Thank you so much.
If you're still listening, then you have reached the end of this podcast episode. If you're watching this on YouTube, then you may have noticed that the quality of the camera footage of me wasn't up to standard. I've had a bunch of technical difficulties where I thought I actually lost this video, so I'm thankful to just have it up there, even though it doesn't look like it's in 4K. But I know how important it is for you guys and for the growth of this channel that you can see my face in 4K, so I do apologize for that. If you're listening to this on a streaming platform like Spotify, then of course you will not be seeing my face anyway. In which case, what the hell is your problem? What's wrong with my face? Anyway, enough about my face. Just a reminder that these podcast episodes are possible because of the support from people like you. If you do enjoy my content and find these podcast episodes or my YouTube channel valuable, please do consider supporting me at www.patreon.com/Humane Hancock. With that said, you'll be hearing from me very soon with more episodes on the podcast, but also more content on the main YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.